Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you for attending this Infoblox webinar on protecting your data and preventing malware spread with the ActiveTrust Cloud. I'm Shrikrupa Srivatsan, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Infoblox, focused on our security solutions. And today we are going to talk about data protection and malware mitigation with our DNS security service that's offered as a cloud service. It's called ActiveTrust Cloud. So let's dive right in. And there is a Q&A window where you can enter your questions as you go through the webinar, and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. So in terms of agenda, we all know that most companies, there are priorities that the leadership has set in most organizations around, risk reduction. So we just take a look at some top priorities this year for some of the organizations today, and how, data protection and malware mitigation ties into those priorities, right? Why should you care about this offering or the solution? And how it ties in with probably one of the priorities of your own leadership team. Let's talk about DNS in the kill chain, how DNS is being used as a control plane for malware, what role DNS plays in today's threat landscape. And it's an important one. It's one of those networking services that's been underprotected traditionally. And better understanding how attackers use DNS can really help think about solutions that can turn this DNS into an asset and improve the security posture. ActiveTrust Cloud is our DNS security service offering as a service, and we will talk about some of the features and benefits around that solution and how it can help protect your devices, whether they're on-prem or they're roaming devices, or you want to protect your users in remote offices, branch offices. ActiveTrust Cloud can protect devices and users everywhere. And then some easy ways for you guys to try out the service and some next steps. So when you look at some of the top priorities this year for certain companies, ranging from healthcare to entertainment, to financial services, you can see that, these leadership priorities tie in to risk reduction. So for example, let's look at the healthcare company that we have here. One of the largest healthcare companies today, their top CXO leadership priority, as it has been published, is that they obviously want to secure their patient data. They want to be compliant with HIPAA. There's no surprises there. I'm sure all healthcare companies have to comply, and this is top on their list of priorities. And they also want to leverage existing technology investments. So that is the more interesting aspect, right? Everybody wants to do more with less, and they've already invested in a lot of security tools, a lot of networking technologies, and they want to get more out of the investments they've already made than put in another 100th security tool into their organization, right? So that's important to understand. And how can they secure their information, secure their data, and meet the compliance requirements by getting more out of the investments that they've already made? And a little later on in the presentation, I will talk about how this company can actually achieve that with some of the solutions that Infoblox provides. A large entertainment company, they want to grow their direct-to-consumer business, right? So when you think about direct-to-consumer business, there are two things that come to mind. Number one is making sure that they provide a seamless and superior customer experience, which means that, if it's an entertainment company, which means if they're like streaming movies or streaming media content online, got to make sure that that delivery is flawless and customers get the rich experience. And the second part is, like any other company that's providing services to customers, they collect customer information. They collect personally identifiable information from their user base, and they need to make sure that that information is not breached, because obviously we keep hearing about these breaches in the news, and that takes an impact on brand, and it's a big deal. The third one example here is about a financial services company. They want to drive innovation and strengthen their business processes. They also want to be compliant with the rules and regulations, and being a financial services company, obviously they have a lot of sensitive information and data to protect. So the bottom line is, for all of these examples, right, reducing risk and protecting data is crucial. Otherwise, their leadership is not going to be able to meet these goals or meet these priorities or have initiatives that are successful in meeting these priorities. So reducing risk, protecting data ties into all of these things. But the challenge is, in spite of organizations having invested in traditional firewalls, in web proxies, email proxies, in sandboxing technologies, maybe some of them even have a robust SOC team and a SOC center, there is still a gap. And the defense in depth has a gap, and that gap is DNS. Traditional tools and technologies, they are good at what they were designed for, but they were not designed to protect DNS. They were not designed to look in depth at the DNS traffic and the queries and to identify malicious behavior versus a legitimate behavior for these DNS traffic. Gateways, email and web proxy, they focus on email and web, right? And they do not do much in terms of, or they probably don't even have visibility into what's going on at the DNS layer. So there is a security gap. And next-gen firewalls are great for what they're built for, but again, there's a gap between the time that a malware first initiates the communication to a known bad site and when a traditional firewall will first be able to inspect that traffic. The other issue with that is firewalls are far away from the endpoints. They're at the perimeter, and they're good at perimeter protection. But once the perimeter has been breached, they cannot detect those malware infections early enough as a DNS layer solution can. So DNS is a gap, and it's one of those underprotected assets in many organizations, and we're going to see in a little bit kind of how attackers are taking advantage of this gap. So a recent survey suggested that 46% of respondents actually experienced DNS-based data exfiltration. Not your data loss through email or web or any other protocol, it's DNS-based data loss, DNS-based data exfiltration. Or it could even be DNS-based tunneling. There are many off-the-shelf standard tunneling tools that are available that are quite easy to get hold of and quite easy to use. There are some legitimate uses for DNS tunneling. Certain endpoint software use DNS tunneling to send information back and forth to their web servers, but it's important to differentiate between legitimate uses and malicious uses of DNS for tunneling. The numbers that are associated with the average cost of a data breach are really high, as you can see. It's 4 million. According to the latest reports, it's 4 million. Is the average consolidated cost of a data breach, and this includes things like customer defection. It could be your brand takes a hit, and of course there are a lot of legal and financial penalties and fees that the organization may be paying if they have a data breach happen on their network. So the important thing to see here is that DNS is becoming an increasingly used pathway for data exfiltration. And it's not just data exfiltration, malware. Most malware, more than 90% of malware, once it's breached the perimeter, tries to make a connection to its command and control server using DNS. And it becomes that easy way to evade detection by traditional tools, including things like ransomware. The ransomware attacks we saw earlier this year, there is a DNS component once the infection has happened. A ransomware communicates with its command and control site to download additional encryption software before it actually goes ahead and encrypts the data. So DNS plays a big part in that kill chain. And there are so many new variants of malware, the antivirus and other signature-based methods are not going to be able to keep up. So it's not about prevention anymore. It's about detecting the malicious behavior early and stopping it from spreading and continuing on and dwelling in the networks. In terms of the kill chain, for those of you guys who are familiar, a cyber kill chain is a process that's laid out to describe the various stages of an attack. These stages include reconnaissance, which is just scoping out the network, trying to see where the vulnerabilities are in the network, and trying to understand where the attackers can start attacking, right? Weaponization, this is how you can exploit any backdoors to deliver the malicious payload. And once the delivery, so then it goes on to the delivery phase, and once the delivery is done, they exploit the vulnerability and execute code on the victim's laptop or the endpoints. And then once the malware is installed, and then it does the command and control communication that we talked about earlier, and it could get additional commands from the C2 server, or it can download additional malicious software. And of course, the end goal for most malware is to get access to sensitive information and cause damage, or lock up the data and ask for a ransom. So as you can see, there are like 7 different stages, but DNS is involved or can be involved in most of those stages, right? For example, DNS is a way to do reconnaissance activity. You can send out DNS queries and DNS packets, and based on how that's responded to, you have a better idea of the layout of the network. You can use DNS also in DNS infiltration to deliver the payload. You can use DNS hijacking or exploits, as well as DNS tunneling that we talked about, to communicate back and forth with command and control sites, or to send data out through the DNS channel. So as you can see, DNS can play a significant role in the kill chain, and many attackers do that today. So that's one aspect. So we talked about DNS as a threat vector, but let's talk about the changing landscape today in terms of how organizations are distributed. It's no longer that there's a physical data center somewhere, all the employees are on premises or in the corporate headquarters, and they are sending information back and forth within the corporate network. That's no longer the case. People are bringing their own devices, they're working from multiple locations, from home, from client sites, from Starbucks, and today's organizations are also increasingly distributed. There are several branch offices, satellite offices, remote offices, and it's hard to deploy security infrastructure to address all of these use cases, right? And IT staff is being asked to do more with less. So they are overburdened as well, and they don't want to manage more infrastructure on premise and have more solutions on premise that they have to manage. And the other part is, on-premise infrastructure is not going to protect your users who are now everywhere, right? And a recent survey, actually Gartner says that by 2019, 57% of workers are not going to be in the office. They're not going to be desk-bound in the office. They're going to be working from multiple locations. And a recent survey said that 3/4 of organizations are concerned about data loss or malware when these users are connecting from outside the corporate network, so to speak, right? So that's another challenge to think about when you're thinking about implementing security solutions. How can you make your security follow your users, right? And one of the ways to do that is with consuming security from the cloud. So using security services that are delivered as a service, you can now address that expanded use case of protecting users everywhere without having to deploy infrastructure everywhere, or without having to manage all the on-prem infrastructure. So this is a good segue to talk about our Infoblox ActiveTrust Cloud. And ActiveTrust Cloud is a DNS-based security solution that's offered as a service. Infoblox hosts the service, and we deliver it to our customers as an easy-to-consume subscription licensing model. And you can use the service to protect your devices now, not just on-premise, but also wherever your users are connecting from, or even in your remote offices and branch offices. We talked about consuming services from the cloud. What are some benefits? As I mentioned earlier, for IT, there's less stuff for them to manage on-prem. They don't have to install more infrastructure. They don't have to configure it, deploy it, manage it, and all of that. Everything is done from the cloud by Infoblox. And then the other part is that there's lower upfront costs. So you're now converting all that heavy upfront CapEx into a more predictable OpEx model. And you can scale as you grow, right? You don't have to build capacity for peak traffic. You can, start off with a smaller set of subscription for a smaller set of users, and then as you scale and as you grow, you can increase the tier of service. So that gives a lot more flexibility to organizations. And of course, it's faster deployment. I mean, as soon as you're set up, you get access to the features and the services. There's nothing to upgrade. You don't have to refresh your operating system or whatever every few months. All the latest and the greatest upgrades are done in the cloud, and you just get access to the services and the features. From a business perspective, you can get up and running with your security immediately, right? You can immediately improve your security posture by signing up for the service. You don't have to wait for deploying any infrastructure and rolling it out in the traditional way. And if you do have Infoblox on-premise, some of you guys may be already Infoblox customers on-premise, and this solution actually works seamlessly with your on-premise infrastructure and gives you unified reporting and unified management as well. And again, it's easy to try new capabilities before deploying it broadly. So, faster access to services, less upfront costs, less stuff to manage on-prem. All of these things are making a really good case for consuming security services from the cloud, and we see this happening in our customer base as well. Just in terms of a functional summary of ActiveTrust Cloud, so ActiveTrust Cloud, as I mentioned, is a DNS security service. It stops DNS-based data exfiltration. So the way it works is when you have DNS queries going out or recursing out from your organization, it's routed to ActiveTrust Cloud, and the security policies are applied in the cloud service, and we look for any patterns that indicate that there's data exfiltration happening via DNS. We look for malicious communications to known bad sites. We do that using a highly aggregated and curated threat intel feed. We detect data exfiltration and advanced threats like DGA and FastFlush using behavioral analytics, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. And we also provide deep visibility into the infected endpoints. So if you can get IP address of the infected endpoint. You can get additional contextual information like who is the device assigned to, what is the lease history, what's the DHCP fingerprint information, where has that device been in the recent past. So there's a lot of the contextual information that you can get to accelerate remediation and get more information around the scope of the infection with ActiveTrust Cloud. So some of the components, so I talked about malicious communications and blocking malicious communications. We do that with the DNS firewalling capability. So when we detect something that's going to a known bad site, automatically put it into the RPZ or response policy zone. So any future communications to that bad site is blocked at the DNS level. We have what's called the Threat Insight module, which is the behavioral analytics capability that can detect advanced threats like data exfiltration, DGA, FastFlush, and DNS Messenger. DNS Messenger is a unique threat because it's fileless. So none of these traditional tools is going to help you detect fileless malware unless you have a behavioral analytics module that can look at those queries in real time and look for patterns that match the DNS Messenger capability. We use advanced threat intelligence. Our threat intelligence is aggregated from multiple sources, and I'll talk a little bit about that. You can also do threat investigation. So if you find a threat indicator, you want to know more information about the threat indicator, you can go and take a look in this Google-like search tool called Dossier, and that gives you a lot of contextual information around those threat indicators, so you can get more information around that. Public APIs. So we believe that working together as an ecosystem is important, right? There's no silver bullet for security, as everybody knows. But when the networking security and DNS and traditional security tools work together, you can actually get a lot more in terms of better ROI on the investments that you've already made in security tools, but also get a lot of information around DNS indicators of compromise. And using these public APIs, you can pull that information out from ActiveTrust Cloud and include it into your SIEMs or put it into your vulnerability scanners or any other endpoint security tools to take further action on these malicious hits that ActiveTrust Cloud detects. There's detailed reporting and analytics that's available with the solution, and also the recursive DNS service has geolocation response, so you can reduce latency as well. So let's kind of double click on a couple of these features. I talked about threat intel. Infoblox Threat Intelligence actually uses several sources of data, including government, education, and other leading threat intelligence providers. And we also have an in-house threat research team that aggregates this information, curates the information for low false positives, and then uses that information in our DNS security service or the solution. So what our customers get is timely, reliable, and accurate data, right? That's also actionable. So you can take information on that, you can take action on these threat indicators, and it's also contextual. So you get more information on why a certain threat indicator is a threat and any other related incidents that have happened. We support multiple output formats: JSON, CSV, RPZ, etc. And if you have on-premise DNS security solution from Infoblox, you can even share this threat intel with your other security tools that you're using. For example, next-gen firewalls or SIEMs or proxies. So I talked about detecting DNS-based data exfiltration and fast flux and DGA. The key thing about these advanced threats is that signature and reputation-based tools are not going to detect those threats simply because there is no known signatures or no known destinations or bad destinations associated with these threats. These are zero-day threats that are harder to detect, and the best way to detect these threats is using behavior-based analytics. And what I mean by that is looking at DNS queries in real time that are going out and looking for patterns, right? Looking at TXT records or, looking for presence of data using lexical and temporal analysis. How often is that query going out to the same destination? Does it look like it contains information, right? And there's a threat score that is kept as these queries are going out. And once the threat score reaches beyond a certain threshold, now the algorithm actually flips the switch and says, okay, now I'm confident that these queries that are going out to this destination is actually part of a data exfiltration attempt. So once it reaches that threshold and classified it as a data exfiltration, then we can put the destination into the RPZ feed. So now future queries to the destination are blocked, right? And this type of streaming analytics, real-time streaming analytics, is needed to detect the advanced threats that we talked about, like data exfiltration and DNS messenger and DGA and fast flux. So Infoblox is the only only provider that provides this type of capability. So in addition to signature and reputation, we also provide behavior-based detection to detect these zero-day threats. We talked about dossier and threat investigation. Again, it's like a threat research tool. It's a Google-like search tool that gives you a lot of contextual information in a single view, right? So you don't have to go and do research on multiple sites on the internet to find out more information about a certain threat indicator. You get all the information packaged up in one UI, and it also includes historical registration information, reputation information, et cetera, et cetera. And if the customer requires that they stay anonymous, you can also allow the user to stay anonymous. You can cloak the identity of the customer who's performing these queries. So really good, easy, fast way to investigate these threats without having to go to multiple locations. So I talked about public APIs. So the public APIs enables you to pull information from the ActiveTrust Cloud around the DNS indicators of compromise and the events that have been detected, and you can put that information into a SIM or vulnerability scanner or NAC solutions to take further action, right? As we're building out the roadmap, we're doing a lot more in terms of ecosystem integrations with ActiveTrust Cloud. So you're now, all the different security tools that customers have invested in are now actually working even better because they now have visibility into DNS-based detection, DNS-based security events that have been detected. And that information is now being used for correlation as well. So this helps that the leadership priority we saw earlier in the presentation, where they want to make their existing security tools better. They want to get better ROI of their existing security tools, and this is the way to do that, right? By integrating with the DNS security solution, they get more information, they can take rapid action, and get more contextual information on the threats. So in terms of reporting, ActiveTrust Cloud has robust reporting capabilities for the network administrator. They get operational and usage reports, but more so for the security administrator, you get information around kind of response hits per security policy. So how many hits did we get on, let's say, exploit kits? How many hits did we get on phishing sites? How many hits did we get on malware C&C communications? How many hits did you get on DNS tunneling, etc.? You also get information on top malicious destinations that your infected devices are going to. What are those top infected devices and clients with hits to bad sites? And you can also have a lot of double click on additional information around the threat categories and the contextual information that we talked about. What's the metadata? Who is the device assigned to? Where has it been in the network in the past? What type of device it is, etc., etc. So there's a lot of contextual information as well in the reporting. If you do have Infoblox on-premise, either Infoblox ActiveTrust on-premise or DDI on-premise, the ActiveTrust Cloud solution actually integrates seamlessly with the on-premise solution to give you more deeper visibility. So all the contextual information that you can get from the on-premise grid infrastructure, that will be pulled into the reports in ActiveTrust Cloud. You can get complete unified lifecycle view of device activity, whether it's on-premise or roaming, or it's coming from an roaming state to an on-premise state. You can manage all of that using a single UI with single management console, and you get that unified policy management as well if you do have on-premise Infoblox. So it's very easy to get started. Again, given that it is a cloud-based security service, you can just sign up for the trial on our website at infoblox.com/ActiveTrustCloud sign up. You get information immediately around how to access the service. Now, there are two ways to access the cloud service. You can either use an endpoint agent. The endpoint agent, it's a lightweight endpoint agent that can be deployed using your standard SCCM tools. So that way, it eases into your workflow. Or if you're using McAfee EPO, the endpoint agent can also be deployed using McAfee EPO as well. So if you're a McAfee shop and you want to just have one kind of deployment tool, you can deploy this agent with the EPO as well. The other option, if you want an agentless option, is to use what's called the DNS forwarding proxy. And the DNS forwarding proxy is a piece of code that can run on a VM on your in your infrastructure or in on-premises, and that will reroute all the DNS queries from the endpoints to the ActiveTrust Cloud Service without having to deploy agents on the endpoints themselves. The advantage, again, as I said, is if you have non-standard devices where deploying endpoint agents is not ideal, you can use the DNS forwarding proxy, and again, it's a lightweight software that runs on a VM. So once you've signed up for the trial of the service, the device gets registered, and those devices are now protected with the ActiveTrust Cloud Service. So really easy to get started, and obviously there's a lot more information as well available on the website. But in terms of why Infoblox and what makes this solution unique, I talked about using a combination of reputation, signature, and behavioral analytics. So Infoblox is the only vendor that provides you that combined multi-pronged approach to threat detection, be it attacks or data exfiltration or malware or any other advanced threats that you saw earlier in the presentation, right? And Infoblox is the only DDI vendor that gives you the hybrid model. So you can use an on-prem solution, you can use a cloud service, you can use a combination. Maybe you want to use on-prem for your on-prem users and maybe the cloud service for your roaming users or remote offices. Or you may be a cloud-first customer, right? You may prefer to consume services from the cloud, and we see increasingly our customers doing that for reasons such as not wanting to manage more stuff on-prem. So, the cloud service gives you the ideal option for that. And of course, we can provide you a lot more contextual information around these infections and hits with actionable network intelligence. So I talked about reputation. Just as a reminder, how does reputation work? Reputation is when you know the list of kind of the bad neighborhoods on the internet, and you use that information to block DNS communications to those bad sites. And that's everything that you get with the threat intelligence. And again, our threat intelligence uses several different sources, including government, education, and leading threat intel providers. We do have a signature-based DDoS protection solution, which is not part of ActiveTrust Cloud, but that helps protect your external-facing DNS against DDoS attacks, or your internal-facing DNS as well against DDoS attacks, because you've seen cases where DDoS comes from within the network as well. And you can also use signature-based techniques to detect tunneling, DNS-based tunneling, because some of those off-the-shelf DNS tunneling toolkits use actually well-known signatures. And then we talked about behavioral-based detection and machine learning. That's part of that solution. That's part of ActiveTrust Cloud solution to detect those zero-day threats that don't have any known signatures. So as summary and next steps, you can go and try out for the service in the URL that's mentioned here, infoblox.com/ActiveTrustCloud sign up. We do offer a free 30-day trial, and once the 30-day trial is over, you have the option to choose a tier of service that you need. We have tiers of service ranging from 500 protected users all the way up to 60,000 protected users and beyond. So depending on the size of the organization and the number of protected users and devices that you need, you can choose the tier of service, and it gives you all those capabilities that we talked about against DNS-based threats. So with that, let's go to some Q&A, and I see a few that have come in through. So James has a question. Can behavioral analytics detect DNS tunneling? Yes, absolutely. So behavioral analytics can detect known DNS tunneling that that are like standard off-the-shelf tunneling toolkits like Iodine or Hyoka, things like that. They can also detect the zero-day DNS exfiltration. So, which is why behavioral analytics is kind of like a superset to the signature-based methods to detect DNS tunneling. So we always advocate kind of a combination, but if you just have behavioral analytics, that's fine too. It can detect both known and unknown DNS tunneling and data exfiltration methods. Looks like we got some more. Just as a reminder for the audience, if you have more questions, do enter them in the Q&A, and I'll answer them one by one. The next question is, what ecosystem partners does Infoblox integrate with? So the Infoblox DNS security solutions on-prem integrate with a whole wide of ecosystem partners. This includes endpoint security like Carbon Black. It includes NAC solutions like Cisco ICE. It includes vulnerability scanners like Rapid7, Tenable. It includes, includes FireEye for sandboxing technology. So we can take information from FireEye and put it into our RPZ feed. So if it detects some advanced persistent threats, we can put that information into our RPZ feed. We can send threat intel information to another whole suite of technologies like web proxies or firewalls. So we integrate with a broad range of tools. And then with McAfee also, we integrate with their EPO for deployment of the endpoint agent, but also on-premise, if you want to send information onto the DXL platform, we have integrations to send information onto the DXL platform. So when we detect something malicious, that information can be published as a topic on McAfee DXL. And then on the other side, any subscribers to that topic can now get that information and notification, and they can take further action. So McAfee DXL. SIM vendors, so we integrate with McAfee SIM, we integrate with Splunk, we integrate with ArcSight, so a whole suite of SIM solutions as well. So it's a robust platform. It's kind of like a Switzerland, so to speak, right? So DNS security is kind of in the middle, and we can send all this information around the detection of DNS indicators of compromise and DNS data. There's a lot of useful data that DNS provides and DHCP and IPAM provide. And all this information can be sent to any of these security tools that customers may already have. And that goes back to the point of improving ROI on investments that customers have already made, and that's something we are totally committed to. Just a good question around any integration with ELK Elastic instead of Splunk. So currently we don't have integration with Elastic, but that's something I can definitely take back to the team and see if there's something on the roadmap there. But right now it's in terms of SIM, it's Splunk and it's McAfee SIM and it's ArcSight so far. There's another question around, can the DNS security solution complement a web proxy? So that's a great question, and the reason is, for those of you guys who are not familiar, recently Gartner published a report around secure web internet gateway. And there's this notion increasingly around combining the capabilities and the benefits of DNS-based security solution with a web proxy to provide what's called like a secure web gateway. And the idea behind that is DNS can actually become your first line of defense, because the first thing that most malware does is to initiate a DNS communication to a C&C server. So DNS can detect that early, right? And it can block that communication and reduce the load on a web proxy. So the idea here is DNS layer solution will look at malicious communications first and block it before forwarding the rest of the traffic to a web proxy, for example. So what that does is, what the combination does is it reduces the load on the web proxy, but also it makes effective use of DNS as a security tool. So increasingly we see that as where the market is headed, where the combining the benefits of DNS and web proxy has a lot of synergies, and that's where we see the market heading as well. There's another question from James. Is indicator of compromised information shared with Infoblox? If yet, is it anonymous? Can customers opt out of it? So I'm assuming that you're talking about any information around infected endpoints in a customer's network, and if we get information around that. So this is basically, there is no data coming back to Infoblox. If the question is around, are we gathering customer data? So we are not. Right now, what we do is you get reports on the top infected endpoints and the top hits in your environment, and so that you can take action on those infected devices. But there's nothing like where that data is now coming to Infoblox, and there is no customer sensitive information that we gather. There's another question around how do we access ActiveTrust Cloud Service? Do we need to install agents? So as I mentioned earlier, ActiveTrust Cloud Service can be accessed using an endpoint agent, or it can be done using a DNS forwarding proxy. So there are two options, and the endpoint agents, we've made it really easy to install by enabling it to be installed using your standard SCCM solutions or your McAfee EPO. So those are for endpoint agents, and currently we support laptops, so PCs and Mac. We will have support for smartphones next year, iOS and Android. And then the other option to access the cloud service is through a DNS forwarding proxy, as I mentioned earlier. All right, so looks like we have answered most of the questions that have come in. Obviously, you can always reach out to us after the webinar if you have further questions on ActiveTrust Cloud and some of the capabilities that Infoblox offers. And there's an easy way to try out the service. As I mentioned, you can try out our service on our website, and you can then choose a tier of service that you need. So thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you and have a good day.